All right, without further ado, I wanted to introduce this three-part webinar series for all of you who are attending. The concept really came out of an ongoing conversation that a coalition had with Rankscale about a lot of the mythology that exists around how you actually rank in LLMs. If you're familiar with SEO at all, you've probably seen the GEO versus AEO versus AI SEO versus SEO concepts and how people are arguing for whether they're the same or whether they're different. And in any sort of highly funded, rapidly changing channel, there's always going to be a lot of things that are published that just frankly aren't very reliable, or maybe aren't reliable for very long. And so we wanted to sort of use some of the data and clients that we have access to as an agency, and then also in our partnership with Rankscale, to run some tests and hopefully start to maybe answer some of the big questions that come up around how to rank in AI and how to rank in a prompt response. So that's going to be the series that we focus on with the webinar. I'll be joining on behalf of Coalition Technologies. It's a 16-year-old full-service digital agency, which is best known for our work in the SEO space. There's a good chance that we rank near the top organically for a lot of different SEO services and company-related terms, regardless of where you are in the realm. And we've been doing that for a long time. We've been big believers in trying to find the balance of how to get Google to see your client or your business the way that you want them to, as well as actually providing a benefit in terms of what keywords to rank for and who you're ranking in front of to the actual business that you serve, which case might be some of you, and then also the end consumer. Is what you're doing from an SEO practice actually beneficial there? So again, won a lot of awards, had a lot of great case studies as a result of that, and super excited to be throwing some of our knowledge into the ring with Patrick and with Jules today.
Awesome. So maybe I introduce myself next. I'm Patrick. I'm the co-founder of Rankscale. I'm especially grateful that we have this webinar series together with Coalition Technologies, one of our earliest power users. We had some podcasts in the past, and I'm really happy to show you what's state of the art in AI search together with Jules, who run an experiment from our side. He will present the results here. And yeah, so we have quite a lot of agency and enterprise customers. So we were pioneering AI search visibility in 2024. Right now we have over 2,000 active users, a lot of big enterprises and power users, so to speak. And yeah, we have the full flexibility of coverage. That's why we are so probably liked from Pro users. And yeah, maybe Jules, you also have a couple of words from your side.
Yeah, my name is Jules. I'm the chief of staff at Rankscale. As Patrick already mentioned, I will be quickly running you through the experiments. Jordan said, please keep it short when it comes to the data there, not unless there's so much interesting data. So I was trimming down a lot actually the last few hours, but that is something I will guide you through. Maybe when it comes to AI search, I think what makes Rankscale interesting is that we cover the full spectrum. So AI search is dependent on content, PR, as well as SEO. So for that, we have, as you can see here, the page audit, which checks your technical SEO aspects of the website. If you then go to the next slide, we then see, for example, the citations. So to see where potentially have a PR issue as well as a content issue. And if you go to the other one, there we also, for example, see our in-depth sentiment analysis, which literally states what are the positive things that AI search engines say about your brand, what are the negative ones, and then you can even drill down on them and literally see the specific page or specific content on the website that actually resulted or influenced this positive or negative keyword. Especially interesting when, for example, it is fake news, they can reach out to the party to rectify this.
Yeah, and that's a real issue, certainly, the power of Reddit, especially with Google right now, and social media platforms with some of the specific LLMs. It just allows somebody to say anything, and all of a sudden, that's how your brand is represented. So we're going to talk about 3 different things in our webinar. And again, when we were conceptualizing what we wanted to do, we really wanted to kind of almost get into like a myth-buster sort of mentality and sort of say like these are the things that everybody says out there, and we want to see if we can test those theories a little bit more and come up with some conclusive recommendations for our attendees. And so today's conversation is really geared towards how LLMs work. I think one of the big myths that I've seen really prevalent inside of AI SEO or GEO conversations has largely been that you really want to get into the training data, that if you can get into the training data and you have your client referenced in a particular way, if you get into a particular source that's using the training data, it's really going to be extraordinarily powerful in helping you in terms of a prompt response or a prompt response ranking, versus some seem to really be advocating for more of a spray and pray, sort of a mass market, just get as much repetition of the same thing out there and then hope that that actually works through retrieval, through essentially a search and discovery function inside of the LLM. And we're trying to dig in and say, like, is one of those actually more valuable than the other? Are we actually going to be seeing a benefit from, again, being in this training data as being a part of the training corpus, or whether there's really more value in being a part of that retrieval layer? Again, AIs are a little bit different from our typical search engine experience, which has sort of the big index and then an algorithm applied to that to rank. We have AIs doing some different things based on what they know. We put that in quotes there, or based on what they're retrieving. And again, what drives them to actually trust a particular source or a statement against some of the others. And so really, we put together an experiment, and I'll let Jules and Patrick jump in and explain how we approach this particular experiment and some of our findings.
All right, then we'll go ahead. So I was looking for interesting brands to check out whether, for example, training data and web search actually has a very big difference in the results. So I found and ended up with Azazie. Probably I'm pronouncing it in an incorrect way, but let's just call it Azazie from now onwards. Azazie is a US-based market leader when it comes to dresses for brides, as well as, for example, formal wear. And what they're stating often is that they are the best shop retailer for example, plus-size people, so plus-size dresses. What is also very interesting with them is they uniquely position themselves as an affordable option in comparison to, for example, other bridal offerings. And what is also really interesting with, for example, this specific brand is that they published heavily. In the last, let's say, 8 months, they have been publishing over 98 posts, which is very significant. And therefore, I was, of course, very curious whether this actually has some positive impact on their AI visibility. So a brief primer on the experiment setup. What we wanted to check is there actually a difference between, for example, models that purely rely on training data, as well as models that rely on training data, but then, for example, use web retrieval to supplement their insights, because that's also how you should look at it. You have a base, and then on top of that, you have the a retrieval of current pages on the internet. We have been checking out Gemini 3.0 Flash, Claude 4.5 Haiku, and then also OpenAI GPT-5. As you see, they all have a different training data cutoff period, which was actually something really interesting that we will see later what kind of impact this has. With the modes, of course, we use the API without web search as well as API with web search, just to keep the experiment as clean as possible. We had prompts focused on informational stages of the buying journey, considerational stages of the buying journey, transactional ones as well. And then I also every now and then had a variation when it comes to recency, and we have been tracking them daily for the past 2 weeks. And I will try to go to the insights as fast as possible. I will stay high level. If you're interested in going a little bit deeper into these results, just send us a mail, and then we make sure that we send you the slides, so you can also just dive a little bit deeper into it, and also maybe on like a slower pace. So what we noticed is there a difference between the branded prompts when it comes to just training data as well as training data and web retrieval? As you can see there, all had a 100% AI visibility score, so no significant changes here or differences here. Nonetheless, when we go to the next slide, And we go to, in my opinion, always like the battleground of AI search, the non-branded prompts. There we actually see quite a significant difference. So the moment that you are training data, what is nice about Azazie is it is an established brand. They have quite some coverage online. They have a lot of pages they write about them, a lot of reviews on Trustpilot. Nonetheless, what we see is actually the moment that we turn on web search, their AI visibility decreases in most of the prompts. And often it is not even that limited. It are actually very, very significant decreases. So of course, that makes me wonder what could be behind this. And of course, very important, this is all correlation. We don't exactly know where it is causation. Nonetheless, when it is a very significant correlation, we can be at one point have quite a high confidence degree about whether it is correct or not. So if you go to the next slide, we will quickly give the word back to Jordan on the query fan out.
Yeah, and I will quickly say just on the matter of the test, like a lot of times I see people who are really hardliners about statistics and testing in digital. They always say, well, you didn't get to causation. But the reality for most of us who have been doing marketing for a long time is that a highly controlled test environment is just not available to you. So even those tests where I see them come to a point and say, well, we've arrived and we've really come up with something statistically significant. Well, that was good for a month. And now this month, there's some new algorithm update, some new model, there's something else that's changed. And so I think being quick, just as a tip, I think being quick to be able to run your tests, start to find patterns of things is actually really, really significant, so long as you can draw the right inferences from them. So again, just sort of looking at how LLMs are actually working right now. So again, historically, we're all used to sort of that 10 blue link page with lots of ads everywhere, maybe a couple of different particular search features that are running around that. Right now, when an LLM is given the opportunity or it's trained to take a particular direction and it moves from just a prompt and a trained prompt response, you typically are going to find that in that retrieval, it's actually going out and then quietly running a whole bunch of related questions. Now, those related questions are based on essentially its next best word analysis. And so it's starting to look at related topics or related phrases tied to an original prompt. And then it's beginning to supplement these back into its prompt response. So we call that synthesis and claim verification. It's pulling that back into its AI response. And so a lot of times when I see SEOs reporting on a statistic like if you don't rank for the core phrase, that doesn't matter inside of LLMs because most rankings inside of prompt responses are unique. Usually what they're really not doing well is understanding the actual query fan out that happens and why it's happening specifically. So when we look at the sort of the specifics of this test, I think you'll start to see that play out more. So Jules, I'll go back to you for how this is actually driving some of the prompt responses we see.
Yeah, great. So I will stay high level, as I mentioned earlier. Nonetheless, something that we notice, of course, training data, they all speak with confidence. There are very little citations, of course, into the answers of that are just purely based on training data. For example, Claude as well as Gemini did not result any citation. GPT-5 had 5 citations, and honestly, these were just all hallucinated. They were just all on the homepage, but the content was not on that homepage that it was referring to. So that's an interesting one. And of course, with web search, it starts to speak with evidence. It is linking it to the specific page where it got the content from. Nonetheless, if you really look into the citations, every now and then there is still hallucination happening. So be aware of that. If you go to the next slide, we see just a general distinction between the two. Training data, what you have, of course, the coverage is everything that has been in there until there was this knowledge cutoff, whereas with web retrieval, it's the current web. And I think this is also just really, really relevant for when you're optimizing towards AI search engines. Very limited people really look without web search, especially like, let's say, the B2C, B2B buyers. Often they just use a graphic user interface. And if I'm correct, by default, web search is enabled. So therefore, it is just interesting to mention the difference with training data. Nonetheless, web search is where the battle is happening right now. Citations, training data, 0 or made up. with the live web retrieval, we have, of course, the sources that are being cited. Nonetheless, still some of them are misrepresented. Training data, the pure winners are the established brands with very strong coverage and big coverage pre-cut of the footprint. And for example, let's say retailers like Amazon that have just a very, very massive footprint online, they were very significant in the training data. But for example, when they were looking with web retrieval, the brands with fresh, good editorial content, they start to pop up more. Nonetheless, that is something that we will dive into a little bit later. The losers with training data are the new brands. The losers with web retrieval are just the ones without relevant content. When it comes to sentiment, this is actually really interesting. Training data is fixed at the time of the training. So imagine if you have a PR disaster and just at that point, the training data is being cut off. You can imagine that this is, of course, not amazing for your sentiment score 2 years down the line, because often this training data is being cut off like a year or 2 years before actually the model gets released. So that is, of course, not something that is very preferable. And with live web retrieval, it reflects the current web tone. And then, of course, what we see there with training data, Azazie is a very, very big brand, 100% scoring on the brand queries. Nonetheless, what we see even with web retrieval, that it can literally drop to 0% because you have a content gap. And that is, I think, really interesting. It's an established brand, but it lacks the content, therefore it is being skipped. So, quick one on this. Brand queries, they depend on crawlability and accessibilities, but non-branded queries, they are earned. What you just noticed there is, for example, with the non-branded prompts, it just looks for fresh content. It looks for content that is high quality. And if you're not in the discovery phase, let's say, even if you have a transactional query, nonetheless, the query fan-out also includes market consensus, more the discovery considerational kind of queries. If you're missing out on those, you can have the best pages, focus on the transactional queries. But if you're missing out there, potentially you will be skipped out of the eventual answer. You could be part of the candidate set, but you could still be deleted out of the eventual answer. When it comes to reputation, as I previously mentioned already, it is frozen in the training data. If you actually go already to the next slide, we can go a little bit more in depth even. So what we noticed is Gemini Flash, they had a cutoff around January. So what I did was I looked into Trustpilot, actually all the reviews that they had, because if you look at the current web retrieval citations when it comes to consideration, we noticed that Trustpilot was a very, very big, highly cited source. So therefore, I went into it and I wanted to see actually, could there be a correlation between it? And what we actually noticed with Gemini Flash, mostly were positive, and therefore also in the training data, the sentiment was 90%. It's great. Same with GPT-5, 16 positive reviews there in the 2 months before the training cutoff, 6 negative ones, and then we had quite a high training data sentiment score. Nonetheless, when we looked at the different reviews that were given before the training cutoff at Claude, it was mostly negative, and it was just also not negative about customer service, but really about the product. And then you just notice that a year later, the training data shows a sentiment score of 58%. So even if you have a great product, but the reviews before the training cutoff are really, really bad, they tackle your product, you can be certain that the sentiment score will drop. And what we noticed with the web search, it all equaled out a little bit again. So the source types, of course, I don't think that I need to go that in depth on this one, but you have different kind of sources that were being preferred depending on each funnel or each stage in the funnel. Informational ones were really focused on like owned pages, as well as a little bit of PR. Consideration pages or consideration queries were focused on, of course, the reviews and user-generated content, and transactional ones, again, owned pages. What is really interesting there is, of course, a brand can't control Trustpilot, but you can publish content, owned content, that could potentially compete for the citation share at the consideration stage. So keep that in mind.
I would jump in too, and I would also just quickly say, like, this is where it's actually really good to pay attention to your reviews and not just sort of relying on something coming out in the wash. If you do have somebody who's leaving you negative reviews, they're not founded, they don't appear to be actually legitimate reviews. This is where you actually want to start thinking about, do I want to contest or report these, rather than just sort of assuming that I'll get 10 more positive reviews later and that'll wash everything out. Those sort of sticky bad reviews, especially those that are illegitimate, can create a longer running problem for you.
And yeah, this is, I think, very much related to the previous slide. Each model retrieves just from different parts of the internet. So be aware of this. Also be aware of the fact that probably your users will be using different kind of AI search engines, and try to identify which AI search engine that they use to prioritize your efforts there. So that you, for example, if your users are mainly using Gemini as well as ChatGPT, then don't start to already prioritize for Claude sources that Claude prefers. And I think this one was, in my opinion, quite surprising. I did not expect it, actually. I thought that training data would have like way more narrowed field than, for example, web search data, but it did the complete opposite. Web search really narrowed the field. It didn't level it. And what we noticed there, for example, is the gainers with web search are the ones that created content that were tailored to the prompts, whereas the collapsers with web search, these were these more broad organizations, these very big organizations that potentially don't have the content that is tailored to these prompts. And I was not expecting to see this. I thought a web search would potentially even broaden and increase the amount of brands that would appear in all of these queries and AI responses, but it did the exact opposite, and it was extremely significant. So be aware of this, that the moment that you are using AI model with web search, then you create content for the specific query, because it will narrow you out of the AI response. Therefore, be aware of this. Web search is not a democratizer, it is a content meritocracy. What is really important here is to notice and to take into account publish content that is tailored to the questions that your users have or would ask an AI search engine, or be replaced by the ones that do. So what we notice here is even like the smaller brands that are maybe 1% of the size of these bigger brands that have way less PR, but that are tackling the exact queries that are being asked, you will see them skyrocket. So content, maybe I'm getting a little bit repetitive here, is king, and is still king, and probably will always be the king.
I like the last tagline there: publish or be replaced.
And then here we, of course, see web search rewards what exists and penalizes what doesn't. What was actually really interesting, I was not expecting this, but for example, in general with web search, when we were looking at Claude, Azazie was actually declining in AI visibility. Nonetheless, Azazie has a specific page on their website called azazie.com/promotions. And the crawlers, they find this, and actually their AI visibility really increased there. So that is something interesting to take into account. Make sure they have the content that your users would be looking for. If you don't have the content available, it will get skipped, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I know we'll talk about specifics on content, but again, I can't highlight this enough. LLMs don't need a real high prominent, highly authoritative URL like we would have with Google. They're really looking for something that more specifically matches the specific query or query fan out, which is, again, a really crucial takeaway from a strategic standpoint.
And this one actually also came a little bit as a surprise, but it's of course very much correlated to the one where web search narrows the field. I thought that if the content is potentially not available on your website and the internet or the AI model can crawl it from somewhere else, it will potentially fill this content gap. Forget about it. You need to have the content, otherwise you will be skipped. Very interesting here is, as I previously said, Azazie, they published 98 blogs but honestly, the quality of these blogs is just bad. It is not tailored to their unique positioning of serving brides, plus-side brides that are looking for a nice wedding dress. It just has zero relevance. And what we notice there is a competitor. We have, for example, Avery Austin. We have Maggie Sotero. I don't know how big they are, nonetheless. If I looked at their website, they are not that big, nonetheless. They published 2 blogs in the last year. Nonetheless,
Yeah.
they are cited. They are winning this. And maybe the 3 issues that I see there with Azazie's strategy is it is a common misconception. Just publish more content and you will get cited more. Absolutely not the case. It just creates this illusion of coverage. But if your content is not answering a question, then the content is just not relevant and doesn't exist for AI search engines. Keep that into account. Then also interesting there is the content of Azazie has had 0 recency signals, whereas the sources that were cited all had a recency signal. And yeah, none of them targeted the specific discovery queries.
Real quickly on that, in terms of your, maybe again, think about it from like an SEO strategy, a lot of times SEOs sort of believe once we achieve rankings in Google, it's somewhat stable and we can start to branch out and shift our editorial coverage and publishing to focus on terms we want to acquire. In that analysis, it sounds like that may actually not be the case. You actually, ChatGPT and others may actually want you to sort of stay in your lane and keep refreshing or keep updating content. You think that's accurate?
Yeah.
Maybe I hop into. Oh, sorry. Yeah, I can add to that. Of course, I think you can expand for sure, but you should do it slowly. So let's say if you want to have, you can look at Shopify and other blogs. They got straight up de-indexed at some point because they created so much best of listicles out of their central vertical, so to speak. And at some point, it just got demoted. If you slowly try to build up, let's say you're a car dealer and you want to talk about fruits or something, the way you have to go, the amount of content you have to create to connect cars with fruits is quite big, and you have to create a lot of content to make that gap happen, actually.
Then I will quickly try to really skim through so I don't get in the way of a nice Q&A of Jordan and Patrick. Interesting. Having the year in the title is a retrieval signal. It's not just a date. So when an AI search engine looks for content, it takes the URLs also into account when it sees, hey, this is 2026. This content is from or about 2026. In the query fan out, recency is important. Therefore, you could expect, if you tackle the query, to get into that query fan out. And I think this is a mistake a lot of people make. So maybe they have plus-size wedding dresses and they have the product and they have an entire category and a big library of these kind of products. Nonetheless, if you don't have content about that product, it's going to be just difficult to pop up in AI search engines. You maybe have the training data.
Sorry, I was just going to call it real quickly, maybe a conversation we'll circle back to. It's interesting to see Gemini versus AI overviews and AI mode here. So I'll just kind of put a pin on that for our conversation in a minute. Sorry to interrupt.
Oh, good. We can even go to the next slide. Nonetheless, take into account if you have a product, make sure they also create content about this product.
Okay.
And this is, of course, mostly for the considerational prompts. Third-party citations are just really important. I think right now we're also seeing this with listicles. If you're creating self-promotional listicles, Google starts to take you out of it actually and starts to use it as a source as citations for your competitor. And this is exactly the thing with considerational third-party citations. Make sure that you're on there. If you just create a listicle your own, if you just create some self-promotional content, you can be quite certain that at one point it will just be skipped. So therefore, make sure considerational prompts have the third-party content in there.
And I've heard, I think one of the interesting things I would call here is that Claude actually seems to search less, just naturally, even when you're putting in a prompt that would normally trigger a search in some of these other LLMs. Claude actually tends to branch out into search a little bit less. My prediction is that will change as it gets more consumer adoption. Search becomes more important to your business when you're targeting consumers because you can sell ads. Claude was historically more of a B2B coding sort of solution. Obviously made its way into the mainstream now with all of the press and publicity. So I'll just kind of caveat, I think I would expect Claude to pivot a little bit more from some of these others.
This is already the final thing that I want to share. Keep into account, it's not just a content volume problem, AI visibility is an architectural problem. You need to have the processes in place, make sure that you cover the content gaps, of course, also make sure that you cover potential third-party citations for the consideration prompts.
Maybe I'll jump in, I'll give the quick summary, and then we can jump into some of the questions. And again, if you do have questions, we'd love to have you throw them into the chat or the Q&A. I believe we've got both of those active for you, so you can get those in. We'll try to answer those as they come up. But big takeaways, really, I think there's a couple of strategic pieces that you can act on now. They can blend in nicely to your existing SEO strategy. Obviously, ChatGPT is rising, Gemini is rising, Claude is rising as a portion of all of our traffic and conversions, but it still is proportionally small compared to most of what we're getting from our big SEO sort of mainstays in the Google search results. But first is just make sure you have true clarity around your entities. And again, I would really stress here, think about how your entity maps out to different things and different sub-entities. We're seeing entity map files becoming a lot more common as a suggested GEO practice. But really the idea is that once you start talking about a single entity, the human mind naturally starts to map and connect it to other things. And LLMs are going to try and reproduce those connections from a technical structure, and they do because of this next best word sort of methodology that they have. And so if you as a company or as an SEO are not really thinking about how to holistically and consistently represent an entity, you're going to run into problems. You also need to really be thinking about answer-ready content. You want to be creating pages that really are sort of looking at high value, high intent questions, comparisons, evaluation criteria, and you're providing those things succinctly and directly, and you're optimizing really clearly for those particularly. Technical accessibility is massive. In some ways, we probably should shift this over to the left. We are talking about computer systems, and so technical accessibility is a massive deal. And so sometimes it slides down our evaluation because we're humans, and it becomes visually it's the least important for us. But certainly for an LLM that is essentially a computing system, technical accessibility is going to be huge. Third-party validation, again, really, this is no longer a story you get to own exclusively on your own website. This is one of the areas where Coalition's GEO strategy differs from our SEO strategy, even though we really do believe that GEO is a subordinate practice to SEO. But in GEO, it's really less about how well you can rank your own individual piece of content inside of a search result. Within AI, we really are talking about what piece of content is most likely to rank inside of a particular prompt. How do we take advantage of that? As an SEO, I really wanted to get people into my customers' conversion funnel on their website. That was a sign of SEO success. Today, that's just not something that you're going to have the ability to control as reliably. And frankly, because of the way that AIs are manipulating the funnel experience, they try to hang on to that customer as long as possible. You just may not be able to insert your own branded website in a way that you traditionally are accustomed to. And then finally, you really do have to think about AI visibility as being different from traditional keyword rankings. Understanding like the cutoff dates for training data is actually really important, because if you have something new or something old that's happening, you're going to have to battle against that. Understanding what types of prompts move from training to a retrieval or search is also super critical. And that measuring is really dynamically changing. That's where I love Rankscale. I also don't envy being them because they've got to figure out how those problems evolve. So, all right. Our webinar that'll be coming up after this is going to be the myths about AI search. We're going to specifically look at on-page content and code. But before we actually jump into some actual Q&A between us, we have a couple that have come in from some of our attendees. So maybe we'll jump out, we'll answer those. So we've got a question about self-promoting listicles. Is that content one should get rid of or edit? Or is old content okay to keep? If edit, what's a good way to work on that? Patrick or Jules, what's your opinion here? Because this is actually very much kind of an emerging what's happening in this particular SEO or GEO strategy.
Yeah, so in general, I think self-promotional listicles are, it's not a problem per se, but it really depends on how it's right now. So when you say you want to edit it, there is a reason maybe you want to edit it. If you have your listicle and you promote yourself on position 1 and you can accurately explain this why this is the case, then I see nothing wrong with that actually. But if you start creating, I don't know, 10, 20 listicles for all your features and you're the best in all features, so to speak, that might be not accurate because there are a lot of other tools maybe in your vertical. So it's the SEO answer, it depends. I think it's okay to keep it if it's not overly self-promotional. So if you can defend what you say in the listicle, I think you can keep it. Nevertheless, you can always update it and keep it up to date, of course, if something changes. That totally makes sense.
Our opinion, I would say, is a couple of things. So a good SEO is thinking about long-term investment. They're not necessarily just thinking about how do I win a ranking today. And that's especially true when you're working with an established business. And so if you're here as an established business or an SEO who caters to established businesses, they're not going to be interested in how quickly, but how shortly you're able to come up with a strategy that gave them a little boost in rankings and clicks, because ultimately you're going to have a hard time sustaining that as your strategy gets addressed by Google. And so again, a lot of SEOs, their retention period is 3 months or less because they sort of look for the gameable solution. And ultimately, they maybe does work for a couple of months for their clients. Then there's some sort of algorithmic correction, and all of a sudden doesn't work. And so what looked like a win is now a big loss for you, and the client is out the door. So I would say there's a little bit of a frame of reference for this. If you're a brand that is just emerging, you are super scrappy, you're scrambling as fast as you can just to get some kind of market share. These sort of self-promoting listicle strategies, which do work, might be viable for a moment, but don't build your business off of them because given Google's practice, which I think some of these LLMs will borrow from as they mature in search, is likely to be either the content becomes highly devalued. It's not hard to match your domain and your company name on your domain as an entity to your own listicles and then wash that content out via programmatic means. It doesn't actually require a manual review to flag that you've done this. So I would say, like, if you're building your whole business around that strategy, just expect that at some point in the near future, especially with Google, there's likely to be a drop where that content just becomes less valuable. Historically, in the last couple of years, Google's become more averse to true penalties. So unless you've really abused this strategy, I wouldn't necessarily expect it to sort of result in your whole domain being flatlined. If you are really abusing it, I'd start to look at maybe getting rid of some of those or substantially editing some of those. And then maybe the final tip, especially for bigger brands or SEOs working with bigger brands, you have to be really careful about these claims. Some of these do violate European Union trade law. They violate US communication law. So if you're out there, you're saying this is like a actual meaningful review, and you're not actually reviewing your competitors fairly, you can get in trouble for that legally in a number of different states and even federally. And then certainly within the EU, that becomes a risk as well. If you're a small business, again, there's a million out there that are trying to get away with this at the moment. You can sort of hope you blend into the background. But again, lawsuits are really a very real threat for businesses, especially small businesses. And so if you're an SEO and you're working for a small business, maybe be careful about how far you want to go down that path, because ultimately you could have won them again the result for a little while. But if a bigger competitor doesn't like how you wrote about them, you get a lawsuit. Suddenly your job is out anyways because it was your strategy that got them in that trouble. Any comments on that one, Jules, at all?
I think everything has been mentioned.
I can just add something because Jules mentioned it earlier, and we already see it also happening with the self-promotional listicle, that your brand will be skipped, and then your citation of your own self-promotional listicle will be used to recommend the competitor, which is kind of you worked for the citation of the competitor. So that's already happening with the last core update, as we see.
Yeah, we saw a lot of those dropping out, and saw Reddit take a lot of spots. One of the things we've actually appreciated as a bigger agency has been the number of small SEO agencies that are out recommending us actively for all sorts of specializations, which I wouldn't even necessarily claim for myself. Like, best SEO company for New York-based automotive insurance agents. Yeah, it's not actually a keyword I'm targeting at all, but I appreciate you saying that I'm one of the best. Probably are, but again, like, your listicle is probably actually doing me more good than it is you at this point. What about JavaScript? Are LLMs able to decipher and work with that if parts of the product detailer page are set up that way? Are there huge differences?
It's a good question. So in general, it depends again on your tech stack. How is your website structured in general? If you're on a JavaScript framework, you should definitely make sure that you have server-side rendering in place so that Google can actually see your HTML. Otherwise, you would see some cryptic Next.js files mostly and CSS files. So this is important. And I would try to, if it's important, it shouldn't be hidden behind JavaScript. That's my go-to strategy here.
Yeah. Jules, you want to pitch in anything, or are you just going to be fully in agreement there?
Fully in agreement there. Indeed, what is just really important is making sure that the content that should be read, don't put it into some animation or anything. Put it fully in the code in HTML, so that therefore it is easily scrapable and accessible by search engines.
I think one of the key concepts, which we haven't touched on here, but I think it's just strategically so important for SEOs, be really mindful of the fact that these LLMs do not make money from search right now. ChatGPT is just launching its ad product. They'll likely report some earnings from that soon, but Claude, Gemini, when you look at ChatGPT, the money that comes in is from people asking it to build something, code something, provide some sort of workflow that eats up tokens that are paid for in a real meaningful way. Search behaviors doesn't pay the bills, and so expect them to behave in a way that is very cheap and spendthrift with how they handle search. And so this is actually one of those interesting areas where, again, like, Google has a much better handle on YouTube content inside of Google search than you see even in Gemini, and you see in some of these other LLMs, because processing videos, understanding the content of videos, the text that's in videos, if it's not provided in a transcript, is much more difficult to do. And so we see ChatGPT and some of the other LLMs that are pretty mainstream having some big blind spots when content is just not in plain text. Someplace on the site are highly accessible that way. And part of that's just a budgeting decision, trying to index a ton of video content, a ton of content that's buried in JavaScript or in interactions. It just takes more time, more money, and ChatGPT doesn't have it. They're already losing trillions of dollars a year. And they're not going to do a lot of extra work until they can see some form of monetization there. So
Maybe
I had a couple
interesting
of
to add to that one. In general, always when I try to look for opportunities to potentially improve the AI visibility to a few of the experiment websites I'm running, one of the main principles that I'm using is token economics. So the easier it is for an AI search engine to understand and to process your content, the less it costs them. Also, the more favorable probably your content will be, especially when different websites have like very similar content. They're just going to go towards the page that just costs them the less money. And it really helps with finding a lot of good experience. For example, like the question formatted headers, it just costs them less tokens. What is actually also really interesting there is, for example, in the German market, a lot of companies, of course, have fully German content. And actually, when you, for example, are processing German content, it costs more tokens. You have an additional step because you need to translate it. They need to understand it. And that's why you see, for example, with a lot of LLMs, they have an English bias because it just costs them less tokens, which is a big problem for a lot of companies in Europe because they often don't have English content on their website. So they just get skipped.
I like to refer to the big LLMs as Uncle Eddie from National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation. He's the guy who rolls up in his RV, parks it in your yard, flushes the septic down the water system because it's cheaper. Like he's just sort of mooching off of everything he can. So that translation tip is super helpful, and I think it's really a good one, especially again if you're in those international markets. I want to jump back into some of the findings and kind of summarize some of what we discovered. So one is that there is a very clear reputational risk depending on both the training data and also the retrieval or search data that's out there. In terms of just sort of the examination that you did, it looks like once, in most of these branded queries, we're almost always seeing search happen or retrieval happen. It's no longer just relying on training. Were there any particular prompts where you saw training data really, training-based responses really dominate even when search was available, Jules?
Unfortunately, I did not check for that specific coverage. So I can't state specifically something. Nonetheless, what we just see within general, the brands that were being shown in the AI response, they really decreased in numbers when you compare the training to the web retrieval data.
I had mentioned a statistic that I'd heard a little bit earlier, and I don't know if you would comment on that. It's somewhat tangential to that, but certain models search more often and some search less. Some LLMs search more often and some search less. Have you seen the volume of search against prompts increasing? Is that something that you guys have analyzed at all? Or is this going to be another test we're going to have to make you run?
So what we have seen not sure if it was this year or last year even, was that the web search actually in ChatGPT decreased at some point. So just the citations were less because there was an update on the model, and of course the training data got bigger, so then the models knew more. And I'm pretty sure that in ChatGPT, for example, there is a classifier in there, and if a certain threshold is fulfilled, then it does a web search because it's not confident enough. But when it has more training or more knowledge at some point, it can answer more confident certain things, and therefore also our users reported that no web search was involved in future executions, and it totally makes sense because there was a model update.
Interesting. And so that threshold, it's based on strength of answer. Is that sort of how ChatGPT looks at it? Is there indicators that any of the LLMs are doing something different, like a certain type of query is more likely to actually be what triggers retrieval behavior instead of training-based behaviors? Are you seeing that happen at all?
Yeah, for ChatGPT, I know that there is a classifier in there that is probabilistic. So based on the prompt, it will decide if a search is needed, or external tools or external data, so to speak, is needed or not. This could be a web search, but this could also something else. So yeah, that's what I have seen in ChatGPT. And also from my personal experience, I think, for example, Perplexity is doing a lot of web searches actually, compared to the other models.
How about Google? Because again, we've been pretty public in having for the last several years of having a strong bias towards Google winning the LLM race. They have sort of the unique problem though of a very successful search engine that they are also trying to merge into their different Gemini products. We've seen obviously the last Google I/O, there was a big theme was that we're starting to try and get forced into sort of one experience. How different are AI overview experiences from Gemini experiences or AI mode from a true Gemini prompt? Have you done any sort of research on that front?
Not yet. Jules, you?
It's coming then.
So we run a lot of experiments, but not specifically. We know that the answers differ, but we haven't set up a control test, so to speak, to check that essentially. Because I mean, you could also set a lot of more parameters in Gemini also. So this has to be well thought through to make it a good experiment, actually.
Yeah, I think we've been trying to run that. Maybe that's a little more our lane, simply because we do the mainstream SEO plus now GEO as a subordinate. We've seen a bit more of a collapse between the three different products: AI Mode, AI Overviews when they're showing up in Google search versus Gemini, and it's starting to show more similarity. But search itself is not necessarily working off of today is not working off of a training basis in the same way that we see like Gemini. It seems like today's search AI overviews is more a matter of an AI layer on top of search versus the other way around. We sort of think about LLMs as being the LLM first that then goes out and searches. And I think that differentiation is really helpful. Jules,
Yeah,
one of the things was, oh, go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
No, sorry. One thing that came to my mind right now is that I've read somewhere that definitely AI mode has a special Gemini model specifically trained for the use case as well. So it's not the same Gemini model. So I'm not sure how comparable that would be.
Yeah, I think we're seeing something similar. One of my questions based on this particular test was, so you mentioned, especially in query fan out, we're seeing recency, posts that are targeting dates. Did you see or have a chance to examine whether it's simply the date in URL, or if ChatGPT and others are actually looking at date published, date updated, schema, or even on-page content to help make that determination?
Yeah, that's actually really interesting, because what I saw there, it was mostly in the URL, the 2026. So all the citations, of most of the citations that were being cited, they just had the 2026 in the URL. So that was something that I was not expecting, actually. I did not check the specific schema out there. Nonetheless, if there was no 2026 in the URL, Haiku, for example, didn't cite it.
Okay. I think one thing we're looking at actually as a test is in that same logic. We again believing that you had a really nice way of saying it. LLMs are a token economy, I think was the term you used, which I like. I just like saying LLMs are cheap. But one of the things we were looking at was will ChatGPT or other LLMs be more dependent on very obvious sort of date communication in a way that and not really fact check that at all. So an example would be taking like your 2024 best wedding dresses listicle that you had on your website and updating that just to be 2026. Is ChatGPT more vulnerable to that type of effort to manipulate in a way that Google isn't? And again, just based on our short-term testing, the answer seems to be yes. That ChatGPT is not necessarily in any way trying to compare earlier, older, or what's changed, if anything at all. It really is just looking at, hey, is this date relevant to this particular search? Whereas Google, again, seems to care a little bit more, especially in the search experience, about whether that's actually a meaningful update or not. We got 2 minutes left, and I want to make sure we close up before before we hit the top of the hour here. Any final like big takeaways, big tips? Like if you're going to say like right after we get off this call, what's the one thing you need to check in your GEO or AI SEO strategy? What is it, Jules or Patrick?
So yeah, I think a lot of it has already been said. I think get the basics straight. Also, you, John, mentioned in the beginning that it's still SEO is the basis you have to do, and it's just another layer we have to tackle. I mean, Google is still the dominant factor when it comes to search, and of course, with all the new releases from Google I/O, it looks like they, as you also mentioned, they might win this race. But yeah, I think and also Google said that do not focus on commodity content. Try to create your content with unique data points if you have it, and try to have something that a model cannot find in the internet on 100 sources simultaneously.
Mm-hmm.
One brief takeaway from my side is make sure that your team is aligned on the prioritization of which AI search engines that you really are optimizing towards. Don't just start to blast out content to try to cover all of them three. or all the different AI search engines, they just have all different preferences. So make sure that you really identify what is the best AI search engine for you to optimize towards, identify what are the best steps, and align on it.
Yeah. It's good. Yeah, one of the strategies that we've been talking about is publishing content for different audiences that might use different particular LLMs or search tools. And so for a lot of consumers, especially if you're dealing maybe with older audiences, expect that Google search is still going to be quite dominant. But if you have a B2B audience and you have maybe a younger buyer or somebody who's doing some filtering for an executive, they're probably more likely to be on ChatGPT. And then again, what type of content does ChatGPT favor? And that might help you understand which strategy to employ specifically for what you're doing. All right, we're going to go ahead and wrap up there. Again, we will be publishing the webinar recording in full. We'll share the slides with everybody. If you have some follow-up questions for us that you'd like to see answered in the upcoming webinars, on page and off page, just how much of a factor are they in LLM and GEO rankings? That'll be the next two topics that we have coming up in the next few weeks. Please do share those invitations around so we get more people attending. We'll make sure that we keep great content and great research backing that great content coming out to you. So thank you, Patrick. Thank you, Jules. Thank you, everybody, for being here today.
Thank you so much.